Just want to set us on a path of thinking about how we value nature and give you some specific examples from where we are right now. All right, so when we look at Manhattan today, it can be hard to see the nature here. And it's hard to value something that you can't see. And I suppose that's one of the motivations to try and see this landscape as it was 400 years ago, you know, on this sort of quintessential moment of Henry Hudson coming here, the moment that most history books start with, including Ted's book, right? The moment when Henry Hudson sails into the Hudson River. You can see his boat there on the left side. This is the island of Mannahatta, island of many hills, home to 1,000 species and 66 miles of streams and people for 8,000 years prior to Henry Hudson arriving. And we're able to reconstruct an idea of what Mannahatta was like, a place that had nature and that had sustainability and had resilience, all these things that we feel like we're missing today. Because we have documents that help us peer into the past, like this map. This is the British headquarters map from the end of the American Revolution, which shows hills and valleys and streams and wetlands and beaches and the estuary for Manhattan Island, for the place where we are right now. We can look back into the old records about the fish that were here. We think maybe 85 different species of fish, freshwater fishes, saltwater fishes, anadromous fishes. For the 350 species of birds or the beavers or the other kinds of mammals that were here. We can try and reconstruct their lifeways by creating maps in computers using modern technologies, maps of the streams, maps of the topography, maps of the hills, to reconstruct the soils underneath all the buildings. And eventually to reconstruct, in some sense, nature itself. In this diagram, which is a network diagram that came out of the Mannahatta project, each point is a plant or an animal or a stream type or a soil type. And the gray lines are individualized connections that connect them to each other. Food, water, shelter, reproduction, disturbance, geology, climate, they're all in here. And the density of connections is actually what makes nature strong. But it's really hard to see. You know, John Muir, we call these Muir webs after John Muir, because John Muir said when you grab on any piece of nature and you tug on it, you find it's connected to 1,000 invisible cords to everything else in nature. And his point was they were invisible. You know, they're hard to see unless you're John Muir or you're, you know, in our vernacular, a modern, you know, trained ecologist. It's actually hard to see these connections. And more so because one of those connections is us, is human beings. And if you were to somehow transform yourself into a way of going into that node, what would you see but this other really complex, great network, which is the network of our friends and our family and our colleagues, that social network that is so famous in our world today, that so, I think, obsesses most of us that we forget that we are actually part of another network, that our network is part of a larger network that allows us to have those connections. Of course, this would be no news. It would be an old story to the Lenape, to the people that lived here 400 years ago. And I love to talk about them, and maybe we'll get to talk about them a little bit, because they lived right here in the same precincts that we do, but in a totally different way with a completely different mindset for their relationship to the environment. It was completely obvious to them how their lives were connected to nature. And that's because they got a lot from it. They got a continuous supply of drinking water. They had abundant local foods. They had local building materials. They had nutrient reabsorption. Their wastes were just absorbed by the land and by the water. They received coastal flood protection and pest control and luxuriant plant growth and a 20-hour work week and lots of time with their family and friends, and they got to live with biodiversity, and they had beaches on Manhattan. Can you imagine? You know, for them, nature was an obvious thing, and that it had value was, I mean, you didn't have to say it because it was so obvious and so valuable. They had a connection to nature, which is something that I think in the modern world we're trying to reconnect. And reconnect not just in a spiritual way or a conceptual way, but I think we need to find ways to actually make a connection in our economics and our politics and in our social relationships. Because as Ted will tell us, this place transformed into something else. It transformed into Manhattan, the place we are today. A place that's really extraordinary. Extraordinary as Mannahatta was for its biodiversity, Manhattan is for its cultural diversity. And it was created as a place to drive culture and art and media and economic productivity. And it really does excel at many of those things, particularly at this moment in time, maybe a little less so 40 years ago. The question, of course, is it has all these ecological problems now that we're struggling to know how to solve because there's all this new ecological infrastructure of the buildings and the streets and the housing for all the people. This place happened because it was created by an economy, and I'm just trying to draw this little diagram here, which you can see in any economics textbook. This is, a very, very simple starting diagram of how the economy works. There are producers that make things, the consumers then buy, and the money goes back. And in the capitalist model, that money gets reinvested to, improve the modes of capitalism and so forth and so on. And it's conceived like this, like it's a box that's isolated from everything else. And the whole point of economic growth, when the GDP figures come out, it's because there's more exchanges, the circle's going faster, or the amount of money that's getting passed is bigger and bigger. And that's, what modern society is driven for, is to make that go faster and faster and bigger and bigger and faster and faster and bigger and bigger, almost as if it was a perpetual motion machine. And there's huge pressures on each of us to make our contribution to this model. Unfortunately, the model is not quite complete. Things came into it to make it happen. Who pays nature? In this triptych here, I have a map of the ecological communities of Mannahatta of 400 years ago. That's what you see on the left, the ecosystems before development. And then those are actually the building footprints of the city today. You can see the famous Manhattan grid. You can see Central Park. You can see Broadway cutting across the grid. And then there's just a simple geographic overlay. And let me just, remind you that it took nature millions of years to create the land that is Manhattan. It took thousands of years for the climate to settle into the form that was here when Henry Hudson was here. Decades and decades of development, of growth to create the soils, to create the woods, to species coming and going, to create the interactions that really make nature work. And nobody paid nature a penny for any of that, right? It's as if it was a free good. And the fact that it's been treated as a free good means that we haven't valued it. We haven't ever valued it. It's not just me who observed this. I found this quote in Ted's book, which I can't believe I missed this because it's such a great quote. He said, Andrew Haskell Green, by the way, is the father of Greater New York. He's the guy who had the idea of creating the 5 boroughs in New York City that we know today. And he said that every little district has its marauders who by encroachment, appropriation, and misuse deplete the general system to transform its vitalities into some niggard scheme for individual profit, right? And the fact is that every time we build a building or we build a road, we are taking from the ecological commons, right? From the commons of nature, and we're appropriating something to our private good. This building here is replacing the forest and the stream that used to be right here in the sand hills that were at Astor Place 400 years ago. And why do we do this? Well, I think it goes really deep into our history and into the way we conceive of the human relationship to nature that comes out of the kind of Judeo-Christian background. So that's one part of it, that we just thought it was ours to take, and we thought we were given by God the privilege to take it. And the other fact is that we have a hard time hearing nature. Nature can't say, I'm not giving you the land. I'm not giving you the oil. I'm not giving you the water. Nature has no ability to refuse. And because it can't refuse, it doesn't have a place in the economic system, right? When we set a price on something, when I go to the store to buy my iPhone, the person who's selling to me says, this is the price. And I can say, I'll take it or I won't take it, right? And there's a negotiation about that price that requires 2 independent actors that can talk to each other. Well, the wolf does speak. Nature does speak, but not in those terms, not in the terms that the economy recognizes for negotiations. So I'll just leave you with 3 suggestions, and maybe Ted and Rosalie and I can pick this up if you like. So one is that we need to see nature around our economy. We need to see the natural resources coming in and the pollution coming out. And the point to do that is at the gates. It's at the moment the natural resources come out of nature. That's when we should be addressing them. And I think we should address them through the tax system. This should be the basis of taxes. When you appropriate a public good for your individual private benefit, you owe back to society, you owe back to nature. And that's the moment of the gate between the natural resource coming into the economy and when the pollution leaves the economy and goes back into nature. Second, and I think Ted and I would both agree about this, you have to understand the trajectory of what's happening. You have to understand where we're coming from. You have to understand the decisions that were made that got us to where we are today. And then you have to have some ideas about how you want to shape the future. And that's a big lift. That's a very large lift. For most people, and including for me, it's really hard to bring all these threads together. I was just in Syracuse yesterday giving a talk, and someone there was telling me how the Iroquois had this idea of planning for 7 generations, which has been appropriated as this sort of commercial idea by sustainability companies, but 7 generations. But what's interesting about it is the 7 generations, they counted them 2 past and 5 forward. That's what you should consider making a decision. What were your grandparents thinking about and your parents thinking about in the decisions they made? And then what will the next 4 generations think about the decision you made for them? Because there are such important legacies in the way we use our land and the way we use our landscape that it'll take a long time to unwind and to change. And so what's so important then is that unlike the past 400 years of people on New York, where basically it was take what I can now and pass on the problems to the future, we need to transform our thinking to be giving to the future. To be giving externalities that will actually make the future a better place, not a worse place. And that's the huge challenge of our time. And maybe this symposium can be a moment where we take up that challenge and bring some new thinking. Thank you very much.